Hello and welcome to Out West, the official podcast of the Western Governors Association. I'm Idaho Governor Brad Little. In today's episode, we'll be speaking with some of the nation's top aquatic invasive species experts about the innovative practices they've developed to manage invasive quagga and zebra mussels. Earlier this year, we were concerned by the news that zebra mussel larvae had been discovered in the upper Colorado River, a waterway that supports 40 million people throughout the West. While we wait to see how this infestation progresses, I want to provide some useful notes from Idaho, where we have already begun a comprehensive treatment plan to address quagga mussels that were discovered in the Snake River in September of 2023. If left untreated, zebra and quagga mussels quickly clog irrigation pipes, cripple dams, power plants, and other water-related infrastructure used for agriculture, recreation, and the delivery of clean drinking water. These mussels also destroy fish and wildlife habitat. Managing a widespread infestation in Idaho would cost hundreds of millions of dollars in direct and indirect costs, plus the potential downstream impacts in both Oregon and Washington. To manage the invasive mussels in the Great Lakes, which were the first bodies of water in the U.S. to be infested by quagga and zebra mussels, it costs over $500 million a year. In Montana, the estimated economic damages of invasive mussels are $234 million per year, including $122 million to recreation, $61 million to agriculture, $47 million to infrastructure. Additionally, the estimated loss to lakeshore property values is estimated to be nearly $500 million. Knowing the economic impacts of these infestations, the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, led by Director Tewalt, immediately launched rapid response plans when quagga mussels were detected in the Snake River in 2023. The plan included treating an 8.6-mile section of the Middle Snake River with a chelated copper product known as Natrix. Natrix is labeled and approved by the Environmental Protection Agency for these kinds of aquatic applications. But this was the first treatment of this type and scale ever attempted in North America. While current sample results show a decreased quagga mussel presence in the affected stretch of the river since pre-treatment in 2023, this September, the Idaho Department of Agriculture did confirm the presence of a small number of quagga mussels in a similar stretch of the river as in 2023. In response, the Idaho Department of Agriculture again launched a multifaceted treatment plan within days of the detection. All early indications are that this treatment plan is working, but the state agencies will continue to monitor the area for 5 years to ensure the mussels have been eliminated. Our strong efforts in Idaho didn't happen by accident. Urgent action is critical for success. Director Tewalt and her team spent weeks away from family, working 24/7 to ensure the treatment works. They truly go above and beyond the call of duty, and Idaho is grateful for their efforts. Though these initial treatments have shown some promise, it's important to note that eradicating zebra and quagga mussels has yet to be achieved in any body of water, and that quagga and zebra mussels are primarily spread through human activity. It is essential that all Idahoans and all Westerners clean, drain, and dry all watercraft and recreational equipment. This includes boats, kayaks, paddleboards, canoes, oars, waders, boots, life jackets, fishing gear, buckets, decoys, nets, and other items. You'll learn over the next hour eradication of these invasive mussels is possible, but it will take all of us to successfully rid the West of these pests.
Thank you, Governor Little. My name is Zach Nowak, and I'm a policy advisor here at the Western Governors Association. For this episode, I had the chance to sit down with invasive species experts and managers from across our region to learn more about the threat posed by invasive mussels. As Governor Little mentioned, we focus primarily on the Dresenid mussel threats to the Snake River in Idaho and a stretch of the Colorado River in western Colorado. These cases both deal with similar invasive mussels in the same family, Dresenidae, quagga mussels in Idaho, and zebra mussels in Colorado. But they are unique as far as the stage and the context of the infestation and the approaches taken by each state. Idaho's Snake River feeds into the Columbia, which is the last major river system in the country that is not infested by invasive mussels. An infestation here would be detrimental to millions of people in Idaho and could quickly spread into the massive Columbia River basin. Idaho's response has been aggressive and thorough, and it's aimed to be the country's first complete eradication of invasive mussels from an open water system. In Colorado, the mussel larvae, or veligers, were detected in the Colorado River back in July. Since then, the state has implemented extensive monitoring and prevention efforts and has not seen any further identifications or indication that veligers are spreading. As of now, Colorado's approach seems to be effectively containing the threat and warding off a larger scale infestation. As you'll hear, no two mussel infestations are the same, and the necessary management strategies depend on many factors. Let's start in Idaho.
If we do nothing on the Snake River, we lose the entire river.
This is Chanel Tewalt, the director of the Idaho Department of Agriculture. Her office has been working overtime to manage this threat since it popped up last year.
In 2023, for the first time ever in Idaho, we detected quagga mussels in the mid-Snake, so right around Twin Falls. And that was a hair on fire kind of pace from the time that we got genetic confirmation through the whole process of treating. I don't think anyone had ever seen anything like the pace or the scope of the project. No other state, to our knowledge, has ever attempted something like this before. We, of course, operated in 2023 as if it would be our last chance to treat. It was our first and only chance, and we try to operate that way. But we also recognize in agriculture or any kind of invasive species treatment or pest treatment, those aren't one and done projects. So we aim for that, but realistically know that that's not necessarily going to be the case. That being said, we were heartbroken in 2024 to detect veligers once again in the mid-Snake, and we are detecting fewer of them, which is great. And we're not detecting them anywhere else. And in the interim, from 2023 to the 2024 treatment, we have increased our invasive species program by every measure. And by that, I mean, we stood up in front of legislators and the governor during our session earlier this year and committed and made a promise that we would double sampling in the state, that we would run longer station hours, have more stations, have more activities, and we've done all of those things. So from one year to the next, we doubled the amount of statewide monitoring we do, not just in the mid-Snake, but everywhere across the state, which is huge. And then we ran more station hours, more stations, we've inspected more boats. I mean, every part of the program has grown since then. And we have been monitoring the mid-Snake and testing as soon as the water got warm enough for us to do so. So we had taken multiple rounds of veliger samples on the Snake River, on the mid-Snake specifically. But there is something about the physiology of the mussel population we have there that likes that late August, early September, really warm period when the water finally warms up enough to have some mussel reproduction. And unfortunately, we found veligers around the same time that we did the year before. And so we launched into, again, this hair on fire kind of pace, because that's what's expected of us, is to move really quickly when we have a problem in Idaho. And because we do early detection and we are talking about such small numbers of detections, we think eradication is something that we should still strive for. And we are not intending to do an eradication treatment in 2025. We have structured it and planned it and tried to implement it this year as if we don't get a second chance. We've tried to leave nothing on the table, to do everything that we can to make sure this is the last one. We don't want to put the community through this again. We don't want to put staff, our economic resources, our budget. There's no reason we want to do this again. But managing species is hard. And again, there's no playbook for this. There's not another state that we can look at and say, oh, we're going to go ahead and do what they did. This is how you do it. This is a history-setting event.
In Colorado, zebra mussel veligers were detected in a stretch of the Colorado River near Grand Junction in July. Since that detection, state and federal agencies have also ramped up their efforts on the river, though their sampling and monitoring has not turned up any additional detections. As such, the case in Colorado has not pointed towards an eradication attempt as the best course of action, like it has in Idaho.
At the moment, our highest priority is really identifying the source of these veligers.
You're hearing from Robert Walters, the Invasive Species Program Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
This is not proving to be an easy task by any means, and we are currently working closely with our fellow state agencies as well as federal partners to try and find that answer. We have teams out there on the river every single week. We have staff working in our labs trying to figure out where these things are coming from, and if they ultimately determine that there is an adult population established somewhere in the Colorado River itself, that is a very different situation than if these veligers are coming from some sort of off-channel source, such as a reservoir or a pond that may be feeding water into the river. Once we have those answers, we'll be better positioned to determine what, if any, action can be taken to prevent further establishment within the Colorado River. At the moment, we really want to know as much as possible what the extent of this population looks like. So we do a heck of a lot of sampling is really the first thing that we're going to do to try to understand the extent of the population. Another primary component of that is containment, which, for us, that really means trying to make sure that nothing is moving away from that body of water while we get a better understanding of what this looks like. To help achieve this, we've really put a high focus on public education and are really doing our best to approach that education from as many angles as possible. Few things we've done over the course of only a few days with the support of our agency leadership. We had press releases out. We had signs at access points notifying the public that this species had been identified. Within 4 days, we had staff on the ground at the 5 busiest access points on the Colorado River, providing face-to-face educational contacts and voluntary inspections to those that were recreating out there on the river. We have kept that up since that time. It's been hugely successful, and thus far, our staff has provided over 4,000 face-to-face educational contacts with recreators on the Colorado River. I was recently asked if these preventative efforts are still worth it, and even though we are now seeing this as not a foolproof solution, my short answer is yes. These efforts have overall continued to be hugely effective, which is clearly evidenced by the fact that many states in the East that don't have these sorts of programs in place have many more waters infested with these species and continue to see new ones become positive each and every year. While the costs associated with a program the scale of Colorado's may exceed the cost of mitigating the impacts in one water, there is absolutely a point where the scale will tip and more waters becoming impacted by these species, and the cost of the mitigation will far exceed the cost of prevention. Our goal is to never reach that point here in Colorado, and we truly hope that this detection will serve as a reminder of the importance of these preventative efforts so that we don't have to deal with these impacts elsewhere in our state.
So these two approaches that we've heard, one from Idaho with its full eradication attempts, and the other in Colorado, where managers are trying to determine the extent of the risk and prevent any spread, show how different stages of infestation and different contexts on the river can lead to two very different approaches to dealing with this threat. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, and as Chanel noted, there's no playbook to follow. A through line that I did hear through all of my conversations from managers and invasive species experts revolved around how important it is to catch these species early to have a chance at containment or eradication. That's especially true for both Colorado and Idaho.
Those two cases, factors include early detection. That's a huge piece, right? Once you have full infestation, it's so difficult.
I also checked in with two experts from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to hear about what early detection looks like and what tools managers like Chanel and Robert have to work with.
So my name is Barak Shemai. I am the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Region 2. That's the Southwest region, which includes Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona.
And I'm Theresa Thom. I'm our Regional Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in our Pacific region. And that includes Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Hawaii and the Pacific Islands.
So early detection of invasive species like zebra and quagga mussels is absolutely essential to staying ahead of an infestation and maybe even giving you the option of eradicating a population before they have a chance to establish and spread, which is their specialty. What tools are out there helping in that early detection effort?
We have all kinds of different tools and techniques for detecting zebra and quagga mussels. Their larvae are microscopic, and so one of the techniques for doing our sampling and maybe early detection monitoring is using things like plankton toes, since they're in the water column, And so you use a small mesh net through the water, then processing that sample uses a microscope in the lab to look for the little tiny larvae. So that's one way to look for early detection. And then one of the newer tools, we talk about it as a molecular tool, is using environmental DNA or eDNA to basically use a water sample to detect the DNA of either multi-species or single species using some molecular tools. And we're getting better at this, not just we like the Fish and Wildlife Service, but science in general around, eDNA is getting better because a lot of species have their genomes mapped. So then you can detect the DNA of a species based on this water sampling. And so you can survey a lot of area quickly at now typically a lower cost.
Yeah, and I can give a good example of this sort of early detection surveillance from the perspective of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're implementing early detection surveillance for known invasive species at our hatcheries and our wildlife refuges. We've recently implemented this at some of our hatcheries using environmental DNA techniques, right? So it's a quick and easy way where we can get a ton of samples and go out and look for a target species. And we've done this at our hatcheries, and we've identified New Zealand mud snail environmental DNA positive hits at one of our hatcheries. And so what do we do at that point, right? Raise the red flags. We've got an infested hatchery, right? So we don't do that. But what that tool has given us is an inexpensive technique to identify a potential red flag for us to pinpoint and go in and do some more specific sampling to look for the organisms themselves. And we've done that as well. We went in and did some standard sampling and found the New Zealand mud snails right at the location of where the environmental DNA positive hits led us. So instead of us going through the entire hatchery and pond to pond to pond looking for snails or mussels, we used that environmental DNA positive hit to pinpoint the exact location within the hatchery where they were. And now we're able to target that location for a rapid response and a chemical treatment to eradicate those snails from that particular location. So efficiency is a huge, huge piece of environmental DNA. So we don't have to go out and sample the entire landscape.
Environmental DNA was critical to early detection in Colorado, and Tewalt tells me that they use it extensively in Idaho as well.
That early detection is so important. And eDNA can be an important tool in determining the extent of an infestation. And that's where we've used it this year. And that's where we really aggressively deployed it in the Mid-Snake to help us understand how far upriver should we be concerned, how far upriver should we be treating. And that was a tool that we used all the way from the stretch of the river to analyzing inflows into the river and ag returns and all of those sorts of things. And we're also using eDNA in other parts of the state to help hopefully give us some confidence in the result we get. But even with all of these tools, you have to recognize and know that none of them are perfect. They have to be used in concert, and they have to be used with a good plan in place.
So what does a good early detection plan look like, and how do new tools like eDNA fit into that plan?
So there's a whole bunch of pieces that go into this. And one of those is what we're calling horizon scanning. And the Fish and Wildlife Service is not the only agency doing this work, but horizon scanning ties into more of that prevention realm where we're trying to think about what species may be coming to our region or our location with climate matching and thinking about where species may be coming from, different donor regions that live in a climate that would be easy for them to then live in a new location. And so being able to basically scan the horizon for things that we might not be thinking about yet as potentially being at risk of being introduced and then at risk of being invasive once introduced. And then thinking about hotspots for invasion to focus our early detection efforts. So with that horizon scanning, we get an idea of what species we might or should be looking for. And then the hotspots analysis helps us think about where we should be doing that early detection research.
Yeah, and And taking that one step further is using these innovative tools that we've developed with environmental DNA and handheld environmental DNA units to go out and do that sort of geographically broad early detection surveillance, because we're looking for a needle in the haystack, right? We're identifying organisms that are generally outside of the country that have a high probability of invading, and then looking at areas that match, and then going out to that ecotype, those hotspots, and using the techniques to kind of get that broad swath to find the needle in the haystack out there, so we can truly be early with our detection. And then, the bringing it home piece is rapid response. Like, what are we going to do now? We know that they've come in, we found where they've invaded. Now we need to get rid of them, right? And so that's where the rapid response comes into play, and early detection and rapid response, EDRR, right? It's in the title, it's in the name. We need to be able to implement that as well. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service has been piloting another grant program around rapid response, and that's the Rapid Response Pilot Program. And I think that was BIL funded. It's $4 million to kind of test out what a pilot rapid response program would look like. But I think tying it all together and making sure that there's follow through with implementation of a response is the way we should be doing business, not leaving it on the onus of another land manager or state to find the funding to respond.
That response piece is something I talked about with Stas Burgiel, the executive director of the National Invasive Species Council, or NISC, which takes on invasive species threats from the highest levels of federal leadership. Stas talked about the importance of a coordinated rapid response, and he spends a lot of time thinking about how NISC can help facilitate rapid response from the national level.
So one of the things that's being stood up within the National Early Detection Rapid Response Framework is the formation of interjurisdictional rapid response teams. Right now, this is particularly being considered within the Department of the Interior. So it's, okay, new sighting, it's an aquatic invasive species. Okay, we know we have various expertise and equities within Fish and Wildlife Service, within Bureau of Land Management, and within Park Service. How do we mobilize those individuals to, go to the particular site and do the testing, through whether it's sort of using environmental DNA or other technologies? How do we delimit the extent of the infestation? And then thinking through working with the various non-federal partners, what kinds of resources might be brought to bear. One of the things there has also been thinking about sort of caches of equipment. So figuring that sooner or later, we're going to have some kind of response. Who has what equipment? Who has the boats? Who has the various tools? Who has, if we're going to be using any kinds of pesticides, who has those? Also thinking through some of the regulatory issues with regards to the application of those. So trying to, as much as possible, kind of think through in advance, what are the things that we're going to need in this case, a rapid response scenario to identify the extent of the infestation and then what needs to happen. But then also it's key to understand whose land is this occurring on? Is it state land? Okay, and then presumably a state agency will be in the lead, and then federal agencies are working to support that effort. If it's on federal lands, the situation might be reversed. And so in that sense, there's also thinking through, again, the relevant authorities, whether those are for the particular federal agencies or state or other actors as well. The other thing is, if you look at, for example, Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, they do have their own individual response teams. Some of those might be more focused, for example, on terrestrial weeds and the like. And so the idea was, how do you take those particular agency-specific teams and broaden that so that we're not just sort of working specifically within the Fish and Wildlife Services on their refuges, but we're able to bring in kind of the best from different agencies and say, okay, we need everybody to concentrate on this new infestation on Park Service lands or this infestation in the state of Colorado. And so really it's trying to figure out, how do we have an interagency response rather than just individual agency responses?
Invasive species infestations, particularly with invasive mussels, can move very quickly and can overwhelm an ecosystem in short order. Collaboration from groups like NISC at the federal level and between individual agencies at the state level is essential to being prepared for a potential infestation long before it happens. Director Tewalt told me that their interagency collaboration in Idaho, as well as their relationship with federal agencies, was the biggest reason they were able to have such a rapid response on a pace and scale that has never been seen before with quagga mussels.
We know from other examples from the time of detection to the time of treatment in other areas has taken about 6 months. Idaho did that in 2 weeks. And that doesn't mean we cut any corners. It doesn't mean we don't make any of the important phone calls. We just do them very, very quickly. And what that also means is that we have leadership from the top, truly from the governor, to set this as a statewide priority and to tell every natural resource agency in the state, this is also your priority. This is not an ISDA project. This is a state of Idaho project. And everyone lent us their time and their talent. They're really their best and brightest people to help us pull off something at a scale and a speed that I don't think folks think is possible. But it is possible when you have, leadership like we do, and we get together informally and formally. We do roundtables. We have a relationship. So when I call Fish and Game, it's not a cold call. When I call DEQ, it's the same thing, that we help each other throughout the year, and we are expected to have a relationship that is productive, professional, and very collaborative. And so that starts well in advance. We do that all throughout the legislative session. This is a part of the cabinet that truly just gets along well, and we are willing to pitch in with each other and be helpful. That is a leadership perspective from our governor and from his staff. And we all live in a culture that is an expectation. That's not new, and it's not a surprise. And so we're able to move really fast, and we're able to call on that relationship that already exists. And so those things are there. Then when it comes to the formal aspect, we do a lot of work in the region. So our technical staff in the invasive species program and the noxious weed program do a lot of work all throughout the year with the region. And so we can keep our technical experts in step, as well as the more informal relationships that we need to have to keep things moving really, really quickly. And the same thing is true of the relationships that we need to have in agriculture. The amount of time that we spend with the other cabinet or the other agencies in the cabinet is analogous to the amount of time we spend with industry. So we took farmers and ranchers on the river with us. We took local leaders and legislators, local commissioners. Those are important relationships to us. And those are the only thing that, that relationship that we have is the reason that we can move quickly.
True early detection and rapid response, like we've seen in Idaho, are the two key factors that make a full eradication attempt possible. In Colorado, their early detection on the Colorado River was very effective, and their response through monitoring and containment has so far proven to also be extremely successful. Their situation does not point toward eradication as the best course of action, though, and it may never reach that point. But Robert Walters from CPW told me that early detection combined with new technologies has put eradication more front of mind for managers than ever before.
Really what it comes down to is, there are researchers out there that are really looking at different ways that these species could potentially be eradicated from the landscape. There have been more and more research studies that have gone on primarily in the eastern half of the United States, where these species are much more prevalent, that have shown that some of these options may be more effective than we ever really knew in the past. It was really in the last 2 years here in the western United States that a couple of these eradications have been attempted, including the large-scale eradication on the Snake River. Really nobody in the West had attempted anything of this scale in the western United States prior to the last couple of years. So that was just never really part of the discussion before, or at least not as prevalent as it is today. But now that that has been attempted, it's certainly something that more people are willing to talk about. It's also really important to consider the impacts to non-target species when discussing these sorts of efforts. As an example, in the Colorado River, we have federally managed threatened and endangered fish species, along with several other state-managed native fish species that would have the potential to be greatly impacted if an eradication attempt were put out there on the Colorado River. So that's something we have to keep in mind is, does the action to actually get rid of the mussels exceed the potential impact of the mussels themselves?
These are the types of hard decisions that the state of Idaho had to weigh before opting for eradication, and they've been very upfront about both the consequences of their treatment and the price that would come from not treating the river. The reality is that even the most effective eradication is bound to disrupt the ecosystem in some way.
In order to cause mortality in mussels, you're probably going to cause mortality in other species as well. So in 2023, we held a town hall with the community, especially because it was new at the time. Nobody had ever experienced something like this or what we were going to try to do. And we were open about the product we were using and about what was going to happen as a result. And we prepped the public and the community to say, this will affect fish populations, it will affect plant life, it will affect algae, it will affect potentially every living thing in this stretch of the river. And we worked hand in glove with Fish and Game to assess, to do pre-treatment surveys of the fish populations there to have a understanding of what would come with treatment. And we did the same thing this year. So there's definitely a downside. And I know personally that our staff, and when we talk about fish mortality, I was there the first night in 2023 and the first night in 2024 as we picked up dead fish from the river. And it is a heartbreaking experience to be surrounded by a team who so loves our water resources that they are willing to dedicate their careers to fighting for them. To go and see the impact of what we had to do is heartbreaking. But we also know, as hard as it is, it was better than doing nothing. And so we definitely know what the repercussions look like if we didn't do anything. And this is a public process. Everyone should have a right to see it, even some of the ugly aspects of it. And there's nothing here that we're hiding. And those are very conscious decisions. But the reason that we can make those decisions is also because we have relationships, and we also have a governor who knows this project inside and out, that we have a comfort level making hard decisions because we know our governor's going to back us, that he has given us the tools and the ability to go through this process and the trust that we need to see it through, even though there's some really hard pieces about it.
Idaho's treatment this year has produced lower levels of fish mortality, and it appears to be effectively targeting the small mussel population remaining in the river, though it's too early to determine whether or not it will lead to a full eradication. As far as eradication goes, Barak and Theresa from Fish and Wildlife said that there are a lot of projects out there looking at eradication tools that don't disrupt the ecosystem in the same way as chemical treatments. Barak said that these tools are promising, but he's not sure zebra and quagga mussels can be eradicated from the country in the near future.
But I do think that we have the capacity and we have the technologies, and I think we have the political support that we need to bring this broad scale and prevent new invasions. I think we can do that. And I think that some of the smaller eradication efforts are within our grasp today. And I think with the new technologies that are being developed, I think that we may have room for expansion on that, because as you can imagine, there are really a huge suite of projects that have been put on the ground as it relates to quagga zebra mussels. And we have recently funded a LLC called Biomi Lab, and they're a biotechnology lab, which is looking at mussel gene editing using a variety of technologies. CRISPR is one of them. And so what they're researching is a method called disseminated neoplasia, where quagga mussel cells are essentially adapted to be used as a form of transmissible cancer in marine bivalves. And we'll just say disseminated neoplasia, we'll call it DN. So those DN cells are transmitted from one individual to another, resulting in lethality. And in mollusks, it was first described in the 60s and been studied extensively by marine biologists. And it's transmitted from mussel to mussel just by proximity. And that mode of transfer has been kind of experimentally reproduced by co-culture of healthy and cancerous mollusks within a shared tank environment. And so the natural disseminated neoplasia for freshwater bivalves has not been reported, but it might exist in isolated populations of waterways throughout the world and could serve as a control tool if something like that were to be developed. And so to me, this is very, very innovative and looking at, molecular technologies and what we can do out there right now. And that this is probably 10 years out. So we're trying to kind of continue the project and provide some funding so they can continue to explore those possibilities.
What about you, Theresa? Do you think eradication is a possibility?
Yeah, I'm totally an optimist. Like I totally, I think that if we can just hold the line on some of these things, eradication is totally possible. I mean, we're just getting really good at early detection with some of these new tools. And so I think it's just a matter of time before, some really smart folks or, new techniques or new technologies become available. We're learning how to do all of this better. And so I have complete hope that someday we'll be able to do this. But again, that doesn't mean that we stop our prevention activities. So just preventing moving around all these species, whether we mean to or not, that's really still the key.
That's why we work so well together.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in, and thank you to all of our guests who lent us their expertise for this episode. While we can't predict what the future holds when it comes to invasive mussels, we can be sure that there are lots of talented people in the West implementing early detection and devising rapid response plans to keep our waterways safe, whether they're dealing with an active infestation or not. Before we go, we would be remiss not to point out a developing story about the discovery of another invasive mussel, the golden mussel, off the coast of California. This identification in the port of Stockton is the first known occurrence of golden mussels in North America, and these bivalves pose a threat that's very similar to quagga and zebra mussels. While we are at the very early stages with golden mussels, we'll be keeping a close eye on this detection here at WGA, and I know that our state and federal partners will as well. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Governor Little.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Out West, presented by the Western Governors Association. Before I sign off, I would like to thank Director Tewalt, Theresa Thom, Barak, Shemai, Stas, Burgiel, and Robert Walters for sharing their experiences with us for their work to help rid the West of mussels. As a reminder, Western Governors Association winter meeting in Las Vegas is December 9th and 10th. Until then, I'll see you out west.